Peter Bryan is one of the most disturbing and chilling figures in British criminal history. Known for his gruesome acts of cannibalism and multiple murders, Bryan's case exposed glaring flaws in the UK's mental health and criminal justice systems. Welcome back to Crime Chronicles. Stay tuned as we look at the cannibal serial killer Peter Bryan. His life, crimes, and subsequent handling by authorities continue to be studied for the failures that allowed a diagnosed serial killer to re-offend in such horrifying ways. Peter Bryan was born in London in 1969 to immigrant parents from the Caribbean. He grew up in a strict but relatively normal household and attended Forest Hill School in southeast London. Despite this, from an early age, Bryan began to exhibit disturbing behaviours. Reports from people who knew him described him as odd and unpredictable, prone to violent outbursts, and showing signs of severe mental illness during his youth. As he moved into adulthood, his mental health deteriorated further. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and spent periods in and out of mental health institutions. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, Bryan worked in various low-skilled jobs, including as a caretaker and in social housing projects. Despite his background and diagnosis, he was not consistently supervised or treated for his psychiatric condition. Bryan committed his first known murder in 1993 when he was 24 years old. He brutally killed 20-year-old Nisha Sheth, the daughter of his employers. Nisha came from a well-respected and successful Gujarati family who ran a clothing shop in West London. Bryan was a shop assistant and caretaker for the family and had been trusted in their home. The murder was shockingly violent. He used a hammer to kill her, inflicting multiple blows to her head. When police arrived at the scene, they were confronted with an image of overwhelming brutality. He did not attempt to flee or hide his crime and was arrested shortly after. During questioning, Bryan gave inconsistent statements and appeared confused. His behavior made it clear that he was suffering from a severe mental disorder. Following his arrest, Bryan was diagnosed with schizophrenia and detained indefinitely under the Mental Health Act. He was sent to the Rampton Secure Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility, where he remained for several years. After years in secure psychiatric care, Bryan was gradually moved to less restrictive environments. In 2001, he was transferred from Rampton to the John Howard Centre, a medium-security facility in East London. His doctors believed he had made significant progress and could be reintegrated into society. In October of 2003, he was moved to the Riverside Hostel in Hackney, a supervised accommodation for people with mental health needs who were transitioning back into the community. Despite his history of extreme violence and mental illness, Bryan was allowed to come and go from the hostel and was even granted unsupervised access to the public. Several warnings were raised by mental health professionals and social workers about the risks he posed, but these concerns were dismissed or inadequately addressed. He was also found to have stopped taking his medication on multiple occasions, a factor that would later prove deadly. On February the 17th of 2004, Peter Bryan committed one of the most horrific crimes in modern British history. He visited the home of 43-year-old Brian Cherry, an acquaintance, in Walthamstow, East London. What followed was an act of unimaginable savagery. Bryan killed Cherry with a claw hammer, dismembered his body, and began cooking the flesh. When police arrived, they found a scene straight out of a horror film. Cherry's limbs had been removed, and pieces of his body were found frying in a pan. Bryan was at the scene, calm and cooperative, and confessed without hesitation. This next piece of information is pretty horrific. It would later be revealed that he had eaten part of Cherry's brain before the police arrived. When asked why he had done it, he chillingly replied, "I wanted his soul." During his police interview, Bryan revealed that he had developed a taste for human flesh and that his desire to kill and eat people had grown stronger. He admitted that after his release from the mental health system, he had fantasized about cannibalism and killing again. Disturbingly, he claimed that killing Bryan Cherry had satisfied him, and he even expressed a desire to kill again. Despite the horror of the Cherry murder, the system again failed catastrophically. Bryan was arrested and sent to Broadmoor Hospital, a high-security psychiatric institution. However, the safeguards that should have protected others from him were once again inadequate. On April 25th of 2004, just 2 months after killing Bryan Cherry, Bryan struck again. This time, his victim was another patient in Broadmoor, 59-year-old Richard Loudwell. In a sudden and brutal attack, Bryan beat Loudwell to death in a seclusion room. Staff intervened too late to save him, and Loudwell would die 41 days later from his injuries. The murder of Loudwell sent shockwaves through the mental health system and led to public outcry. How could someone already known to be a dangerous cannibalistic killer be allowed to commit another murder inside a high-security hospital? Peter Bryan was eventually charged with the murders of Bryan Cherry and Richard Loudwell. In 2005, he pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. The court accepted psychiatric evaluations that confirmed he was suffering from paranoid schizophrenia and that his responsibility for the killings was significantly impaired due to his mental condition. Justice Griffith Williams, in sentencing Bryan, called the murders horrific beyond belief. Bryan was sentenced to a whole life tariff, meaning he would spend the rest of his life in secure psychiatric detention, without the possibility of release. He was returned to Broadmoor Hospital, where he remains to this day. The case of Peter Bryan triggered several investigations into how the mental health and criminal justice systems handled dangerous individuals. An independent inquiry commissioned by the government concluded that there were significant failings in the management of Bryan's care and supervision. It found that communication between agencies was poor, warnings from professionals were ignored, and protocols were not followed. The inquiry revealed that there had been multiple opportunities to prevent Bryan from reoffending. Social workers had expressed concerns about his deteriorating mental state and erratic behaviour, yet he was allowed to remain in unsupervised housing. Medical professionals underestimated his risk and failed to implement sufficient safeguards during his reintegration into the community. The report made several recommendations for reform, including stricter risk assessment protocols, better communication between mental health teams and criminal justice agencies, and more robust supervision of high-risk patients. But, of course, these changes were too little, too late for his victims. Peter Bryan's crimes left a deep scar on the UK's collective memory. He was labelled the cannibal killer and the cannibal chef by the media due to the grotesque nature of his crimes. The idea that someone could murder, cook, and consume another human being shocked the nation and drew comparisons to other notorious cannibals like Jeffrey Dahmer. Today, he remains confined within the high walls of Broadmoor, a grim testament to a case that continues to haunt the UK's mental health and criminal justice landscape. Thank you for joining us today on Crime Chronicles. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel with your friends.